Welcome everyone to a quick summary of yesterday's events, including also announcement that AMD ThreadrRipper 5000 series is finally coming. So let's start with this. I wanted to independently make a short shout out of this already. We have been waiting ourselves. In my opinion, this is like somewhat, I would say, kind of a year delayed. Also, because we had, of course, the Ryzen Zen 3 based CPUs already, and so finally they are here. Lots of speculations whether they come with AMD abandons ThreadrRipper in favor of just having EPYC. And yeah, here it is now, ThreadrRipper Pro 5000 WX series. As expected, the Zen 3 update. I don't have a direct download from AMD. Probably need to work with their marketing department. So yes, upgrades from 3000 to 5000, of course from Zen 2 to Zen 3. Still the same, up to 64 cores, 128 threads. Clock max boost a little bit improved, up to 4.5 gigahertz. Similar improvements as seen as regular Ryzen consumer enthusiast. A little bit better cache setup there of those cores. Better response time there of inter-cache latency. This is pro security. So not really that much has changed, right? So this is just, of course, improved performance. AMD also pointed this out. Vastly improved efficiency, similar to what we've seen on the consumer side. It's a little bit late, unfortunately. Probably AMD is probably quite sold out. It's still 280 watt parts, the equivalent 3000 numbers here for the most part. 12, 16, 24, 32, 64 cores here. And chiplets here, 2, 4, and 8 chiplets. And yeah, of course, improvements. However, the crazy thing is also, yeah, actually I should notice, so it's still DDR4, of course, because it is the Zen 3 platform. And right now it's OEM only, which is a recurring shitty move. AMD has done this with the Pro ThreadrRipper when the 3000 series Pro ThreadrRipper came out. Of course, most enthusiasts don't like this, especially as Lenovo had this new tendency to e-fuse those CPUs. So this is extremely crazy. I should probably make a dedicated shout out for that you once use an AMD CPU like the ThreadRippers in a Lenovo system. Here they e-fuse that so that in the future the CPU can only be used on Lenovo systems with similar security signatures, which is an extremely dick move in my opinion. They say for its security that in a hypothetical server setup someone doesn't fiddle with your CPU and swap it under your nose and have some compromised CPU, some pseudo security nonsense. But it's of course extremely disappointing for consumers, especially, yeah, killing upgradability. You can't move in lesser entry level to another system that is not Lenovo. You can't easily sell it because obviously they are only a fraction of those people wanting to buy an e-fused to Lenovo CPU. And the word is this 5000 ThreadrRipper available for pre-order like this week or something, only at Lenovo, thank you very much. And for otherwise retail at the second half, I think, of this year, which I think with the 3000 Pro WX Lenovo previously also had like 6 months exclusive stuff. So in yesterday's news, let's summarize this a little bit with this M1 Ultra. Yesterday's video, I made a video that I'm disappointed of this product, and I'm obviously still. I'm also a little bit, I found some more stuff. I also, do they still know? What was the Apple Pro? I would also, yesterday I said, I mean, the disappointment is mostly about the design and similar decisions. I would also like this round thing. I mean, I just find this Mac Mini kind of studio thing disappointing. Also, I think the naming is stupid. They should have called this simply Mini. It's still a Mini, right? Double size and like a Mini Pro or whatever. The studio I find silly. It's basically Apple of the 90s, where also at the end of the 90s they had like dozens of models and everyone got confused. The naming is silly, and also I find this Mac Mini aluminum block looks ugly. I mean, as I said yesterday, I mean, who cares how a workstation looks, right? But I would even say this old Mac Pro, I mean, make it, I mean, at least this trash can look kind of sort of nice, and like at least if they would made it this round thing but half the size or something, or like a half-sized or third or quarter-sized version of this Mac Pro or something. Like basically everything would be better looking and more inspiring, if not going back to plastic like the G4 Cube. So the disappointment mostly of the display and the design. The CPU is of course outstanding. Maybe I didn't mention it that much. I was previously impressed with I have an M1 Max Retina MacBook Pro for work here. Obviously, and so this is just twice that, right? We mentioned this yesterday, just yesterday I found this actually better site here. And the CPU is of course outstanding, right? I said this before, I'm a long user of RISC stuff, PowerPC, Spark, for decades already, and back in the day, 20 years ago, so alternative, non-x86, the RISC CPUs all usually had higher performance, also sure often higher power consumption as well, but usually compared similar generation to Intel, like Pentium and Pentium Pro. At that time, SGI MIPS, SunSpark usually had better performance, at least in professional workloads. And this is of course RISC. This is of course, as I said previously, we had videos, right? Why the many reasons, not x86, not this complexity, no other legacy stuff, and of course everything made for performance and efficiency. And it doesn't, also power-wise, it doesn't need to, it's not that much, but it doesn't need to power memory controllers for more power-hungry, slotted, socketed memory modules on the board. That it saves a little bit, right? Everything adds up. It's not the majority, but it's a little bit. So the M1 Max performance was already previously nearly on enthusiast Ryzen 5950, and the M1 Ultra actually is, I forgot to mention this already, it's a design disappointment, overtook yesterday a little bit. So the performance is on ThreadrRipper territory, right? The single thread performance is even higher, probably if this Geekbench results are to be trusted. And I actually don't like this bar graphs here. So the multi-threading performance is not total ThreadrRipper level here in this, but it is clothing in there, right? And you should not forget that this is of course an apple and oranges comparison, because the ThreadrRipper is only the CPU and consuming 280 watts, and the M1 and M1 Ultra that does include a pretty powerful GPU. So all in all, of course, if Apple doubled that again for M2 Quad dies, so this will be probably on par on ThreadrRipper 5990 or so, if you double this and somewhere there. So all in all, an extremely impressive CPU, of course, nobody ever said something else. And in that light, the CPU is even more competitive, right? Yesterday I was mostly pointing out other things like memory prices and also display stand that is whopping, what was it, $400 or so. In this light, this price is I mean, it is pretty high. Wait a second, was it 20 core? Yeah, so this should be fast actually. We can look this up in a second. So this should be faster than a Ryzen 5950 and a state-of-the-art GPU. So for that you already spend, depending on availability, some $2,000. And then you have the surrounding stuff. Memory, of course, memory at Apple a little bit highly priced. The world's fastest memory, otherwise, how much is it here? But all in all, the price is competitive. It's not as outrageous as you would otherwise think. Although maxing this out even here, Apple binning this, some defective GPUs potentially. So the very state-of-the-art, highest competitive NVIDIA AMD GPU comparable combination, another $100 more. How much memory? 64 gig. Now I need to think, yeah, memory, this memory costs a bit, especially if you use the latest and greatest DDR5. So all in all, this price is pretty okayish, just that the majority of the other surrounding stuff, especially starting with iPhone colors, and also I even didn't realize that the iPhone SE, they increased the price there also from so much to sub $400 phone. And yeah, this is the state of the silicon. So for me, this also means I still wouldn't recommend this the most, right? I said this before. I'm too much burned the last years of serial defects. All in all, with over or about 20 Macs my company purchased the last 15 years, every second Mac, maybe I think over 50% of our Macs had serial defects. The G5 power supply blew up after 1.5 years. The iBooks always had hair cracks. My iBook had a desoldered GPU problem. My friends also. I had the Retina MacBook Pro display image retention. All in all, and you are pretty locked in, right? For most users, you are more. Of course, I don't need to tell you, but just to summarize this, you can't just run Windows on this. You can run Linux somewhat, probably either because M1, N1 Mini and Asahi Linux has already support mostly in place or with minimal changes for this M1 Ultra anyway. It's not yet full featured, it doesn't yet have GPU acceleration, so even if you run Linux, at least for a year, if not a little bit longer, it's usable for enthusiasts, but without GPU acceleration, right? Any GPU, any 3D, any video encode, let alone the neural engines and other such features, or even sound, right? Unless you plug something into the USB. So it is usable for Linux. It's not amazing, right? And it will not be. It will without GPU graphic acceleration. It's usable for video. It is usable for email and web browsing, but not like for state-of-the-art 3D stuff and other advanced video editing and stuff. So obviously it makes little sense unless you are an ARM Linux kernel developer or stuff like that to buy that for Linux. It is possible, but compromised. And that is the thing with Apple's proprietary stuff and not using industry standards like ARM, EFI boot and other standards like even sound, even audio, some PCIe attached standard component that would have a driver in place, let alone all the other graphic GPU stuff. And with that being said, you are mostly limited for macOS, so you can only buy this, again, unless you are a diehard Linux user, for use with macOS, and that is of course somewhat limiting. And as other people said, I said also, yes, everything is soldered, the memory, the SSD. Someone asked on Twitter today, should I go for more memory or stuff, or how's the memory usage? And I replied, yeah, you know what, if you can afford it, buy more, because you can never upgrade it, right? You will regret it. It's not cheap. It's an enthusiast or professional machine. If you can afford it, go for more memory, go for more SSD, because you can never change it, right? Certainly not memory, unless you're Louis Rossmann. Even then, this is even higher density micro soldering of the chiplets that you would also need to desolder from something else, maybe defects, so it makes not the most sense. Maybe possible. I don't know if Apple hard codes that in early firmware stuff, or is it runtime probing that. So even if you could swap this chiplets, which for sure is even more difficult than what Louis Rossmann usually solders, I wouldn't guarantee that it auto-detects. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. And storage, right, SSD, Louis Rossmann, water damage, not necessarily with that, but eventually the SSD wears out, you want to upgrade this. So I don't like where the industry is going. I had too many issues with Apple machines, and this is why I only, even with Mac software, I limit myself, although we are professionals, to the bare minimum of what I buy at Apple stuff. On the AMD side, it is also difficult because the ThreadrRipper now is somewhat delayed, that I'm not even so interested, right? I said before, epic ThreadRipping Linux compilation stuff here, and with so much time passed, I'm already not the most interested anymore. 5950, when was this? Or AMD, does it directly bring us to that? Do they have the release date here? I think Intel does. Oh yeah, accept all the freaking cookies. So yeah, 20, let's see, so that was 11.5, yeah. So it is somewhat like a year delayed, especially if the ThreadRipper, if you as independent enthusiast in retail only get it in the second half of this year. So for me, this also means I would still say, I mean, if you run Windows, you have no choice anyway, right? Then you, unless you want to buy lesser performant Intel solution, well, even then you have a choice, right? Intel or AMD for the most part. And this ThreadRipper, and this is the thing, right? This Mac stuff, yes, it is high performance. It's not industry leading, but it is good, especially for the energy efficiency. The energy efficiency is, of course, industry leading, especially with combined, how did AMD call this previously? Did they call this Fusion? Whatever, integrated graphics. And you can't change it, right? As I said, and on the ThreadRipper side, you could, for example, if you build a business, you start with a business, at the Apple side, if you go with an entry-level machine, you would either later need to shed out the whole money again, either keep this in stock for another desk or sell it used somewhere and regain some of this potentially. On the ThreadRipper side, you can buy a what is the socket name? M4 not. The ThreadRipper socket SRT-X4 or whatever it is. And most likely, don't take my word for it, but usually the 5000 series should work in those boards. And you can start with like 24 cores. That is like similar to the maxed out Mac Mini there. So for similar performance today, go with €1,200 or dollar CPU, and let's Google some stuff here. Some of those are like 1,200 something, depending on which you take. So this is 24, so 1,400 something dollars. 1,000. What is it? No, whatever. 12. What? This. So you can upgrade, right? You can buy this later and like say in a year you're successful, you build your first customers and get bigger projects for FPGA design, for computer aided design, for 3D and video work, and swap this out, right? Still sell this, keep all the rest, keep the memory, and this is what you simply don't have in modularity, and this is what I find a little bit frustrating and disappointing, and especially that this is somewhat needlessly, even the SSD, which even as the Asahi Linux people found has potentially some data integrity issues. Previous video of not flushing that to disk on macOS in case of power outages. That might be increasingly more often in this climate changing and not as peaceful world anymore. And that is somewhat crazy, right? And I would even, this is also the thing for 2000, and that is again the disappointment, right? Not only it looks ugly, I would still say, here's something more modular. Think, it doesn't need to be this, right? It's like a quarter-sized version of that Mac Pro, a half-sized version of that Mac Pro, a third-sized version of this Mac Pro. A little bit modularity. This is not, in my opinion, too much asked. At least the SSD, I understand in this particular case, is this kind of bandwidth. The memory, okay, but at least the SSD, maybe one mini PCIe slot or two, and or a full-size PCIe slot for other professional use. And that is sure, the Mac Pro is still coming, whatever that will be, whether this has PCIe, we will share, like and subscribe for that. But yeah, just my notes, and this is what you have to choose from. And on the AMD side, again, upgradability. For me, this also means with this delay, I can't applaud it that much anymore because the Silicon, the Zen 3 is in the meantime a little bit older. And even I don't really need the Threadripper so much. Sure, I built here Linux 24/7, but it's not that mission critical and not deploying here SpaceX or NASA satellites or stuff. And even for the YouTube views, I'm somewhat reluctant to throw that much money. And I think I somewhat wait more for the next generation Ryzen, for the more consumer enthusiast platform, because DDR5 and so on, and the sheer cost of this, $500 plus minus dollars for the board, $1,500 to $5,000 plus dollars for the CPU, of course. Again, don't get me wrong, it is of course extreme performance, just that even I don't need it the most. And a year ago, I would have, for the YouTube views and the work here, I would have even shed out the money for the views and fun. But now it's 1 year later, and with Lenovo exclusive, which is really a non-normal user-friendly move, it is another probably 6 months later. And then it's a little bit oldish for me to pay that much money, like basically 6,000 plus minus plus memory for the highest tier. Given that situation nowadays, of course, with the crazy events in Europe, everything changed, and I have to say I better keep this money for whatever emergencies arise. Being lucky that I have a 5950X, that is certainly enough for me, and who knows what emergencies come overnight or next week. Otherwise, if you're interested in this, if you need this performance for your professional work, FPGA, layouting, routing, synthesizing each day, that's coming soon, at least to Lenovo. I hope you learned something. Leave in the comments below. High performance, tight integration, modularity. Leave in the comments below. But for x86, the air is getting tight. Intel had the last years problems to scale that. And AMD had problems before, refound their microarchitecture. But going forward, it will be difficult for x86 to scale, especially keeping power in mind. And that will be really difficult to see how this develops. Probably ARM certainly keeps the lead there. It will be extremely difficult for Intel and AMD to keep the lead, especially keeping power in mind. And the only sad thing for consumers is that the Apple stuff is not standard conformance. The only standard conformance stuff in there is ARM and PCIe USB Thunderbolt. Everything else is Apple proprietary, nothing upgradable, and you can't install Windows. I mean, I don't need this. You could theoretically run ARM Windows in a VM, but otherwise, I'm somewhat feeling sorry for the people who need to reverse engineer this. Of course, I understand they have fun, so I don't need to feel sorry for them. It's a freaking lot of work. On the Linux side, people always say, like, I just install Linux. They underestimate how much multiple human years of effort it is to reverse engineer that. Hector Martin there does an amazing job with all their friends around there. And of course, now they make some Patreon and YouTube videos with that. So they at least make a little bit money. It probably doesn't pay for all of it. I understand they make it for the fun and personal education and entertainment. But in a way, it's also sad that people in the community need to do all of this while Apple rakes in all the money. So I'm a little bit conflicted there. And I think personally, if I have the choice, I honestly would still take some more standard conformant and more modular setup there on the x86 side, or RISC-V in the future, or other ARM systems. Just to swap stuff out, just to repair stuff myself, sync SSDs, memory upgrade, and so on and so forth. But yeah, leave in the comments below. That's it for this video. Don't forget to subscribe, and I hope to see you soon for other fun tinkering to come.